What's happening, everybody? And welcome to the 200th episode of the Crash Bang Boom podcast. Holy shit, I made it. And who better for today's guest than Hayden Menzies of Toronto-based noise rock trio METZ. Hayden and I get into the new record entitled Atlas Vending, due out a few days on October 9th. Working with Seth Manchester at Machines with Magnets on it, his present setup, the parallels and differences between his visual art versus musical pursuits, and we get into a good old talk about David Yow's Wang, which was very unexpected, I must say. Speaking of all this new record talk, shout out to my sponsor, New Orleans Record Press. If you're looking to put out vinyl for your project, going over to NewOrleansRecordPress.com to check out the many coloring, packaging, mastering options, and you can add it all up in that real-time quote generator right over there. Need assistance with design or packaging? They can help you, and they print both 12 and 7-inch records in both 150 and 180 gram variants, and they print small runs of 100 and larger runs up into the thousands. And that's NewOrleansRecordPress.com, y'all. Crash Bang Boom Podcast can be found on iTunes Podcast, my SoundCloud, YouTube pages, Stitcher, Luminary, Google Play, Podbean, and more. Basically everywhere other than Spotify, which might be changing soon. So if you like getting them there, maybe you'll be getting it there soon. If you like what you hear, feel free to check out any of the previous 200 episodes and give me a like, a subscription, a positive rating, and or a glowing review. Or shit, all of it. Go for it. The support is appreciated. As always, keep tabs on your favorite musicians who at this present time might be teaching lessons, giving classes, tutorials, and more, as well as bands live streaming their shows during this downtime of touring. And help out any way you can with websites like SaveOurStages.com, where we're looking to bail out the music venues so we can actually have some shows when we step back out of this shit show. Got to keep it happening somehow. All right, 200 in the bag. Hayden Menzies, METZ, Atlas Vending, coming out in a few days, so get up on it. Crash, bang, boom.
Crowds go mad with joy.
Yes! Hayden Menzies of the one and only METZ. What is happening, man? How are you making out these days?
I'm doing all right, all things considered. I'm sort of, enjoying the little bubble that is my home for the moment. I guess that's the best we can do at the moment.
I know, right? What have you been doing with your spare time, man, in lieu of touring? I know, obviously, y'all have a new album coming out in Atlas Vending, and we can get into that. I was just, curious what you've been doing in the last few months, really.
I was trying to stay sane is step one, I guess. It's been
yeah.
It has been kind of a practice in sort of self-management, or self-care to some degree. I think this can be a really, I'll preface this all now so I don't have to keep giving this disclaimer, but anytime I describe that things are hunky-dory with me, it does not mean that I am oblivious to the amount of suffering and pain and anxiety and fear and anxiety that's going on in the world all over the place.
Sure.
But if I can, selfishly, just for the purposes of describing my own little world that I'm doing the best to curate positively.
Yeah.
Things on that front are all right. But like I was saying, it is a bit of a practice to kind of either use this time to identify and work on things about yourself, and whether that's just going easy on yourself and indulging in hobbies and stuff, or whether it's, doing some mental spring cleaning and trying to figure out what is, changing, not changing priorities, but just thinking stuff through, facing some stuff that maybe gets put on the back burner when the rat race of real life is kind of breathing down your neck at all times. So yeah. As much as I miss touring, at the beginning, it was sort of a breath of fresh air in terms of just like everyone just fucking stop for a minute.
Right.
Everyone just check in with yourself, hold on until we make sure that we are doing the right things to protect as many people as possible and ourselves and all that kind of stuff. So that's a long-winded first question, but
that's good.
But yeah, we're doing lots of but sort of record planning stuff, and we're obviously just waiting until we can pull the trigger on some stuff that's actually feasible and responsible, and so we're being open to what possibilities might be available to us, but it's pretty weird waters to navigate at the moment.
Absolutely, man. Well, speaking of METZ and record planning and whatnot, have y'all been able to practice at all during the last few months, or since I would say March or so? And given that Atlas Vending is coming out October 9th, by the way, I'm assuming y'all were able to track everything prior to all of this starting?
Yeah, everything was recorded last November, which is crazy because we actually we took a little longer to do this one than we had with previous ones, with just sort of taking longer to write it and just being off the road and just kind of enjoying. I try not to slow the pace down a little bit, because we had gotten into the habit of, the 2-year cycle. It's like write, record, tour the shit out of it,
Mm-hmm.
come home, rest for a couple of months, and then start all over again. And so for this last one, it was like, let's just pump the brakes. Like, we still want to keep working. We still want to, we still love it. We still love each other, but it's just like, let's just take a breather. And then when we were trying to figure out when was best to actually release it, originally it was supposed to, I think it was slotted for like May. And that, like, just with personal decisions in the band too, was just like, let's not push it. Let's not rush it. So, I mean, there's no opportune or ideal time during all this for stuff to come out. But I guess in the grand scheme of things, it could have been worse. It could have come out right in March or May in the middle of stuff. But
right.
So for the longest time, we hadn't, we were keeping in touch with each other and stuff, but everyone was quarantined, and we eventually started practicing a few weeks ago when it was safe to do so, with like precautions, like masks, and I have like a whole, distance, and I have this whole like drop sheet of plastic in front of my drums.
Oh
and
my
just
God.
Like, I would rather look a little silly and be overindulgent than to sound hypocritical later when it's like, man, why can't we get back on the road? Because this thing just keeps going, but we're, bending the rules, to our convenience. So,
yeah.
So we've all been real diligent with it and try to, do as best we can within guidelines and shit.
Right. Well, I'm glad that y'all are putting it out. I know that there's some other bands that have been putting it out. I've spoken about it previously on on other previous podcasts, but I think there's kind of an industry concept around releasing stuff, and a lot of what I've been hearing is kind of people saying that they're just going to wait. But I think it's also a great time. Maybe there are fewer people putting it out, and also I think people need to hear it and want to hear new music. And going back to what you were saying about trying to stay positive through the whole thing and be productive and channel it in positive ways, I think that's definitely worth mentioning, because you don't want to get so overwhelmed with all of the woes of the world to the extent that you then become sort of less creative, and then your art suffers for that. Because I think, once again, the world needs it at this time.
For sure, yeah.
I'm glad that you said that, and that, again, y'all are putting it out at this time. So that's awesome. Congrats.
Thank you. We're pretty stoked on this one, yeah.
Nice, man. Well, tell me a little bit about tracking, mixing, and again, you spoke a little bit about kind of, the process of releasing it at the bizarre time we find ourselves in. But one, I know previously y'all worked with, is it Graham Walsh in mixing your previous records? Did he mix this one?
No, we love Graham dearly. We always work with him on something to some capacity. So it's clearly not any decision on parting ways or anything. It was just like we had done it the same way for a few records, and we kind of wanted to change it up. The last one, I mean, there's like a rarities one that came out last year, which didn't require us to tour a ton, so that sort of bought us some time while we were still getting Atlas Vending ready.
Yeah.
Albini did the one before, but he didn't mix it. I think
Right.
I can't remember who mixed that, to be honest. It might have been Graham.
I believe it was Graham.
Yeah, no, you're probably right.
Yeah.
And then for this one, we kind of wanted to throw everything on its head and try and just track it and record it and mix it differently. So we actually went to Providence, Rhode Island, or Pawtucket, more specifically, to a studio called Machines with Magnets.
Nice.
And this guy, Seth Manchester, who's one of the people who runs that place, and he engineered and mixed the whole thing.
Nice.
We had a good friend, Ben Greenberg, who plays in the band Uniform, come down and co-produce with us. So we all lived, with the exception of Seth, because he would go to his actual home, but the rest of us, Ben and the three of us in the band, we actually stayed and lived in the studio. There's like basically an apartment at the back of the studio. So we all lived under one roof for 2 weeks.
Wow. And
it was really fun.
I bet.
Sometimes there's this webbing sort of looming over top of you of like, okay, we got to get this done. And I find it can be a little distracting it seems like a luxury at first to record locally where you can go sleep in your own bed at night. And then sometimes I think it's like it's sort of this stop and start halt in a trajectory that kind of gets disruptive sometimes. Yep. But, every situation is different. But for this one, it seemed to work really well. And it Everyone had a great time. Things flowed, really easily, and we approached tracking and just the overall sound a little bit differently, and it seemed to just gel. Even now, just thinking about it, like, the three of us will chat sometimes, or, we're doing a bunch of press for the record and stuff right now, and every time someone talks about the making of this record, it's this really, everyone kind of gets like, not nostalgic, it's not old enough to be nostalgic, but it's just like, man, that was a good fucking time. Like, everyone has positive things to say about this one. So
nice.
Yeah, it was not that any other ones were difficult. It's just this just checked all the boxes. Everyone was having a good time and just seemed really productive and constructive, and it was a good time.
Yeah, man. You mentioned Seth Manchester and obviously Machines with Magnets. I'm familiar with that, with him and his studio out there, because I spoke to John Syverson of Daughters, and they did their record "You Won't Get What You Want" out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really crazy sounding record as well.
Hell yeah.
When tracking it, were y'all able to track anything live with all three of you, or was it the usual, get scratch guitar, bass, and then you track drums, and then everything's layered from there? Was that the general approach?
We all played live and tracked live, but we kind of gave ourselves a bit of a safety net where guitar and bass would be sort of isolated. Like the amps would be isolated, but we would all be in the same room, or at least be able to see each other through some sort of window. Mm-hmm. And so we were all playing at the same time. So if everyone got a killer take, then that's a true live take. And we would do some overdubs on top of that, or, change some sort of stuff. But if everyone nailed it, then that counted as a take, and we just kept it. But the luxury is like, if I had a good one and Chris was like, yeah, I'm not feeling that one, I want to do it again. If I was stoked on the one I had, we didn't have to start all over again.
Absolutely.
But kind of the best of both worlds. It was similar to how we did it with Albini, but this just the room in Machines with Magnets, it just sounds amazing. It's not gigantic, but it sounds incredible. I don't know what it is about the construction or the just the vibe in that room, but the drums sound great. Everything sounds awesome.
Yeah, man. You mentioned obviously Steve Albini. Tell me a little bit about, I guess, working with him, and then maybe just your experience of recording in those rooms. Because I've spoken to Dave Turnkrantz. I believe he recorded the drums in one of the two rooms at Steve Albini's place for that last record that they put out, and that record sounds amazing.
Yeah.
But tell me a little bit about, I guess, just recording with Steve Albini, and maybe what was different about working on a 2017 Strange Piece.
It was great to work with Steve Albini. That was kind of a bucket list thing for a lot of bands, and we had a great time doing it. We were similar in the way that we stayed there for about 5 days, but we tracked drums, bit of bass and guitar, some of which we redid. We essentially came home with drums and some of the other stuff, and then we redid some stuff, remixed some other shit, and then layered, and then did vocals, and then but yeah, super pleasant guy to be around. He knows his shit obviously inside and out. He'll give advice when asked, but he's not a huge cheerleader. I don't think he deserves the sort of curmudgeonly reputation that he sometimes gets, because he was very friendly with us and encouraging and supportive. And she's just like, yeah, I want to document this as best as you guys do. Play your songs well, and we'll fucking nail it, and we'll make sure you guys are happy. So yeah, it was great. And that room sounds amazing too. Like, we actually used the drums. We put them in Studio A. We put them in the big room where all the pianos and stuff are. So just to get this huge, bouncy, leaning pretty heavy on some of the ambient mics and stuff placed around the room. And that was great. I love it for that record. But I think that's one of the things not that specific drum sound, but in general, we wanted to do things differently on this record, where things are a little more direct. There's a little, I don't know how to describe it other than like, we consciously chose to sort of remove a bit of this like audio gauze that we might have on some other records with some songs, where you don't get ear fatigue as much. Like it's it's a little easier to listen to this in some ways, because the highs are higher, the lows are lower, and things are a little more direct. So it just meshes a little more, instead of having to like just teeter on redlining to try and balance instruments and frequencies and stuff like that, which can become difficult when you're dealing with a mic that's 20 feet away, and you've got a 24-inch ride cymbal that is just cutting everything out. And so you just, it's this constant push and pull to try and make sure that all the instruments are balanced enough that the dynamics of the songs are actually coming through instead of just this sausage of a wave file.
Totally.
So in that regard, I think that's one of the bigger achievements that we feel really proud of on this one is we didn't demand so much of that. They still sound like real drums and real live instruments in a room, but let's allow them to breathe and allow them to be big when they're supposed to be big instead of sort of putting them under this woolly, distant aesthetic sort of thing.
Right. Well, when Metz first started out, were there any particular, I kind of associate y'all, I guess, with sort of noise rock-esque subgenre. Were there any particular bands leading into that when y'all formed that were being thrown around? I mean, in the case of Metz, I always hear a little bit of Drive Like Jehu in there and a little bit of that frenetic punk rock energy that y'all have, whereas maybe like someone like Young Widows, who I also dig and who I'd also kind of put a little bit in that world, I think they maybe have more of like a sort of psych goth Jesus Lizard thing more recently. At least that's the way I describe it.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
Were there any particular influences going into this that y'all all shared or that were thrown out there, like this could be a direction for the band necessarily?
It was never really discussed in terms of like, hey, let's see if what are you into? It wasn't like auditioning people's taste, so to speak. But
sure.
But I know what you're getting at, and I think some of it just didn't even need to be said because it was pretty obvious. We all came from a pretty similar background in music, which is, a lot of Discord stuff. And
sure.
Like the first show I ever went to when I was like 13 or 14 was Hoover in Ottawa when I was going to high school there. And I'm still a massive fan of that band to this day.
Yeah.
We've toured with Young Widows a bunch. We've played with Drive Like Jehu, like meeting our heroes. But yeah, those are all big influences, like things like Unwound, bands, a lot of touch and go stuff.
Right.
DeSoto Records, things like that. It's all over the map, but I think we all have really diverse tastes. Like I don't really listen to loud, heavy music when I'm at home very much at all. So I think, again, this wasn't ever really declared when we would first get together to write songs. It was kind of like, what ideas can we throw at each other and see what kind of comes out of it? And if that's like, let's do like a Phil Spector beat on this chorus, but it will sound totally demented, like a, revved up Cramps, because it's that beat trying to be applied to something else. And it's like, that's not, we're not reinventing the wheel or anything. There was no idea that was just like, no, there's a rule book and that's what we're doing. Like that shit was at the door. We never abided by anything that was like, no, we're going for very pure aesthetic in terms of this style of music. That's what we want to do. I think naturally we all play a certain way. So that kind of comes across whether we tried to or not, but it's certainly not a deliberate attempt to sort of emulate anything in particular.
Right. You mentioned seeing Hoover and some of those early shows that were blowing your mind. I know I'd sometimes run through my own mind about as to, like some of my favorite all-time shows, but what were some of those that you saw early on that you still kind of marvel at having seen back in the day and you would maybe list in some of your all-time favorite shows?
Man, that one definitely sticks out.
Yeah.
It's funny. I always talk to my brothers a lot about nostalgic type stuff. I have three brothers, and we're all still really tight, and we all grew up going to shows. And there's a particular venue in Ottawa called 5 Arlington, which is just someone's street address, which is just a house, and that's where they put on a lot of these shows. So that's where I saw. Before I saw anything in like a big stadium or even like a decent sized venue, this is where I saw like 90% of the shows I ever saw was at that place or houses or community centers and stuff around Ottawa.
Wow.
There's like pre-alcohol memory, and then there's when alcohol was introduced into my life where my memory of is a little foggier these days. But yeah, I mean, like my first show ever, I can't overstate that one enough. It was incredible. Like Hoover, I forget who else was on the bill, but stuff like that. There was a local band called Union of Uranus who shared members of like His Hero Is Gone and Tragedy and bands like Toronto bands like Brutal Lights and Hacksaw and things like that, and Deadly Snakes.
Cool. None
come to mind immediately about like early shows other than that really poignant venue and a lot of bands that would play through there.
Right.
But we've like I said, we've also been really very privileged in the way that we've gotten to play and hang out and get to know some of the bands that were like hero status to us, playing and touring with like Hot Snakes and Drive Like Jehu, and it's incredible just to even be regarded. I don't even want to use this term because I would never want it to sound over the line or pretentious, but to even be referred to as a peer to some degree to some of these musicians and artists that you grew up listening to is fucking mind-boggling, but I'll take it.
I mean, I'm telling you, yeah. Did you happen to see Jesus Lizard in the early 90s by any chance? I didn't see them originally with Mac McNeely. I think I saw him after they put out Shot, I want to say. So at that point, they had the other drummer. And then I saw him more recently, thankfully, with Mac back in the band. I was just curious if you were able to see them because he said, speaking of extra time on the hands and some of the YouTube rabbit holes that I'll go down, I've been watching early 90s stuff, whether it's Alice in Chains off the first record or, like early Jesus Lizard stuff. And God, there's just such incredible video out there. Did you happen to see Jesus Lizard back in the day?
Well, I'll be completely forthcoming. I never saw them, but my oldest brother did. It was a venue in Ottawa called Barrymore's. Mm-hmm. But I used to tell this story for the longest time saying that I was there because my brother, he told me, he told all of us in such detail. And I was like, well, I got this story now. I can pass this off. It was total horseshit. I was never there.
That's hilarious.
David Yow got he got arrested the night before whatever city they were at for indecent exposure for pulling out his wang or something. Yeah. So at this show, he just pulled out his nutsack, and so he just was sort of like the happy medium, I guess. And I guess that was the logic. I don't know. And then he ran through the crowd and pushed over like every single beer tap. So there was just beer flowing anywhere. And the poor bartenders were trying to run back and forth to try to turn them off.
Oh my God. That's hilarious.
But I would have loved to have seen them back then. Chris actually from Metz has a great story too. And when he saw them, David Yow singled them out and just started kissing them with tongue, just in the crowd, just found them in the crowd. And he was probably the youngest kid there, and he just wanted to give him a night to remember. But yeah, I saw them again. Not again. Sorry. See, I'm so in tune with this lie I've been telling for so long. I said I've seen them again. The first time I actually saw them was when they did the reunion. It was probably like 6 years ago or something like that.
Yeah, I saw them as well.
And I believe Mac McNeely was back.
Yeah, he was
at that point.
Yeah, he was.
And it was flawless. And from the first note, David Yow, they played I Can Swim, and just dove straight in. And it was like they hadn't missed a beat. They hadn't, I don't know when the last time they actually played together.
Yeah.
Because it's easy for bands to get back together, break up or whatever. Any indefinite hiatus or any prolonged period of time, it's easy for people to people get protective about things they care about and, the nostalgia behind them and things like that. And it's so easy for bands to ruin that legacy, even though it's not up to the people, it's up to the band. It's their decision to make. But, there is that sort of, that gut feeling is like, please don't let this be bad because I love this band. I want to maintain that. And fuck, they delivered. It was like they hadn't missed a beat. It was incredible.
Yeah. That's amazing. In splitting the difference of David Yow's balls and penis, it's amazing. I did not anticipate talking so much about this, but since you mentioned it, I saw him once and he tucked everything back there to where he looked like he had nothing. And then we had his mic in his one hand and then his other hand down, like messing with something. I was like, what is he doing? And he like tucked his dick into his scrotum and just kind of let it turtle out. I was like, oh God. Dude. So he did the tuck and then the reveal, and it was all very memorable, but fucking ridiculous, man.
I love it. Fucking hell.
Oh my God, man. Are there any modern sort of noise rock-esque bands that you dig? I don't know if you're aware of them or have heard of them or not, but there's an awesome band called Bummer out of Kansas City that I saw, and I interviewed the drummer, and that band is killer if you haven't heard them, or if anybody listening to this is looking for other bands out there that do that thing. They're killer.
Oh, shit.
Yeah.
What are they called, Bummer?
Yeah, Bummer. They're from Kansas City. Check them out.
I'll definitely check them out.
Yeah, badass.
I know this is sort of that cliche thing when like you're people who play noisy, loud music. I'm like, yeah, I don't really listen to that.
Right.
I do. I mean, the new Uniform record is fucking great.
Okay.
We're all big fans of that band Cherubs from Texas.
Yeah, totally.
I think it's from Austin.
Yeah, they are. Yes.
I mean, Idols are good friends with us, and it's so
Right.
great to see them being, getting all this attention and spreading such like, positive shit and love around the world. I love seeing that. So we're extremely happy for them. Band from Ireland called Girl Band, who's doing some really cool stuff.
Okay. Well, I mean, I tell you what, are there any records that people might be surprised that you've been digging as of late? I know that I go through phases where I went through a phase where I was listening to tons of ELO, and I still to this day, I just, because my dad listened to soft rock radio and had it on forever, all that music is super nostalgic. So whether I'm listening to like Bread or any of those bands, I totally love listening to soft rock. Are there any records that you've been especially kind of digging as of late that could be of any sort?
Yeah, I mean, well, a surprising one is I've always been a big fan of that band Cake.
Yeah,
I've just always been a fan. I haven't listened to them recently, but on a similar sort of nostalgic radio rock trip, I got into Bob Seeger a ton at the beginning of this.
Oh, I love Bob Seeger. I love him.
It was a best of kind of period for me. I would throw one on, and my girlfriend would just like, because it would be the best part of my day. I'd start cooking dinner and put on the record.
Yeah.
And she just had enough. She was like, "You got to choose something else, man." So a lot of that sort of like outlaw country, like Waylon Jennings and that kind of stuff.
Uh-huh.
Love that kind of stuff. Even if we're like, if we're cooking and making pasta from scratch, there's like dough and flour everywhere, we'll put on like Dean Martin and drink wine and pretend we're, off in Tuscany or some shit, and it's just, or in Vegas. Yeah. And it's just fun. There's one actually recently that a friend of mine who's from Austin, he turned me onto this record called The Caretaker. And it's a project by, I should really do my homework before I bring these things up. I forget the dude's name, but it's like a musical project of his. This is just a pseudonym called The Caretaker, but he's done like solo electronic music and stuff for ages. Mm-hmm. It's this project that deals with sort of memory and dementia and sort of explores this path or this journey, so to speak, of people who are either elderly and might live in care centers, or people who may have mental challenges. And it's weird because it goes from really, really happy, and you get this sort of, something's in the background, you can't quite pinpoint it, but it just puts you in a better mood. Mm-hmm. And it goes from that, and it has old classic sort of vaudeville type tunes, and it has the aesthetic of a old crackling turntable where it's all dusty, and the old really hard vinyl records and stuff, and it just slowly it sort of deteriorates. And some of the, like, there's one record I think it's got like 40 tracks on it, and by the end it's like it sounds like that same song or very similar sounds are way down at the end of some hallway, and you can barely grasp what's going on.
Wow.
And so because it becomes really haunting, but there's still an element of like you feel this tension growing where you don't want to admit that you can't quite make it out and stuff. Anyway, I'm not trying to put words in his mouth or anyone who, if I've missed the point completely, that may be the case. But because it is so long of a record and it's pretty vast, I actually haven't listened to the entire thing. But the parts that I have, it's a trip. It can make or break your day. So I'm not saying it's the best choice. You just read the room before you put it on. But
right, totally.
But it is interesting. It's pretty involved. I admire people who go the distance on projects like that.
Absolutely, man. So stage volume. I know you're a pretty hard-hitting player, so oftentimes fellow bandmates match the volume of the drummer, and overall stage volume can be pretty cranked, and I feel like part of your sound sounds like amps and drums, kind of cranked. And as I mentioned with Young Widows, they have had a pretty loud stage volume. So is that the case with Metz? Are y'all pretty cranked stage-wise, and or has that changed throughout time?
Well, if you described it pretty accurately with prefacing all that, that's kind of the case. Is that the amps are trying to rival drums and cymbals and stuff like that. And I'm not a feather touch player, but it's certainly not some sort of machismo shit. It's just the way the excitement and sort of, trying to emulate drummers that I would watch and be like, man, I'd love seeing people sweat and just, try and bash it out. But it also comes because I have a ton of bad habits because I'm self-taught and I've never taken lessons. So it probably takes other people 2 steps. It takes me about 10. So in order to keep up, there is sort of like, I've built in this process of doing extra work, which, requires a lot of extra sort of effort. So it's certainly not supposed to be showboaty or macho. It's this enthusiasm and sort of, I have to lay into it and to get it all out there. Mm-hmm. But yeah, one of the side effects is that it affects stage volume. And that's even since day one, it's never been a desire to shove it down people's throats or to sort of be offensively loud. It's just because especially when you first start playing, you're playing in a whole mix of venues, anywhere from, 20 people in a church basement to 800 people in a big venue. So you have to moderate that. And I think it's always been an attempt, which I genuinely think we've achieved on this record as well, is like to have levels where there's louder seems louder when it's placed right next to something that's light and finessed and sort of a little more intricate. So we've attempted that in the past, and I think we've achieved it in to certain degrees. But I think on this record, it's quite obvious like how the peaks and valleys are pretty substantial, and I think that's really exciting for us. Yeah. And that's one of the things that we will be able to sort of modify accordingly is just not being cranked all the time.
Right. You mentioned kind of bombastic drummers. I'd say that you certainly have a good balance of bombast in your playing for sure. What are some of the drummers that you feel as though maybe there's a hint of some of their early influence in your playing still to this day? Some people kind of have their holy trinity of drummers. Some people have their magnificent seven. Sometimes they have a baker's dozen. What are some of your top guys that you feel like maybe even influence you still to this day?
Definitely people like Mac McNeely, we were talking about earlier.
For sure, yeah.
John Theodore
is.
I remember seeing clips and stuff when he was still playing in Golden. Just because he's got, he kind of has the whole package.
Yeah.
I actually really admire and envy drummers like Nate Smith, who does a lot of jazz type drumming, and he is just proficient as hell. Just like it seems like he's one of those dudes who seems like he can play any style day or night, and he'll nail it. And he's such a chameleon.
Yeah.
He can throw the weirdest sort of time signature with the classic grip with just like total tasteful finesse, and could probably just lay out, a Zeppelin track as well. Like he could just do it all. Drummers like Carla Azar, I think I pronounced her last name right, mm-hmm. who plays in Autolux and done some like Jack White projects and stuff. She's just got such a cool swing where it's like it's nestled. It's just like it's the perfect complement to, and same in a similar tone. It seems like she just lends the best version of herself to whatever is being asked for that musical thing, mm-hmm. and that kind of stuff. I admire the hell out of. I think that's something that I would love to aspire to do more of as a drummer. But in younger days, heavy hitters, sure, like fucking Mac McNeely, John Theodore, Dave Grohl, Dale Crover.
Yeah, yeah.
All that just that kind of you hear them play and it's like, man, that sounds awesome. It's probably hard as hell. And then you see them, and then you actually see them play, and it's just like, yeah, I was right. They're just fucking crushing
it. Yeah, right. Totally, man. You mentioned a 24-inch ride cymbal. What are you playing size-wise for a crash? A 20 or a 22?
22-inch crash, 24 ride, and 15-inch hi-hats.
Nice, man. And you mentioned Nate Smith earlier, who's a fellow Ludwig guy. You're a Ludwig guy, correct?
Yeah, honorably so.
Nice. I'm a fan, man. I have an early 70s Vistalite kit, and it's a super unique drum set, and everyone that's ever heard me play it always loves it. It's a little.
Awesome.
I've talked about it being a little bit temperamental, and that's what's so great about these new drums and just how well they're designed. But what is the kit that I guess, like for instance, the last record, Atlas Vending? Did you use your own kit on that?
Yeah, we drove down from Toronto, so we brought all our own stuff.
Nice.
So for that one, I used the Legacy Maple. Is like they're 26, 14, 18, and Black Beauty snare, and I think it's like a raw brass or something. It's like this.
Nice.
Anyway, that's another backup snare, and they were both really cool. Awesome. And that kind of has the Black Oyster Pearl, like sort of Ringo Starr, like John Bonham sizes and Ringo Starr wrap. And,
there you go.
I actually just got my first set of Vistalites like a couple months ago.
Nice.
Which I've never had, and I'm totally in love with them. It's like 3 bands, so it's like red, clear red, and it's same size as 26, 14, 18.
Wow, the Bonham sizes. Damn.
Yeah, it was not a conscious effort, but one of my first kits was a pretty cheap like Gretsch kit or something like that. It was like some of these reissues, and I was like, that's pretty cheap, like from the store. And those are the sizes. And like, I guess I'll just learn to adapt to those sizes, and that I've just never gone back really. I mean, I played, on tour, you sort of, if it's festival circuit and shit, you take what you get. But so I have no issue. Sometimes I actually prefer 24 because it's just a little easier to get that rack tom over top. But
you got it.
But yeah, that's what I like at home. But I like to be pretty versatile. Years on the road makes you realize that if you're too particular about some stuff and it breaks or you can't find it and you can't play without it, you got to be able to play anything that's thrown your way. So absolutely. I like to try and be adaptable as best I can.
Yeah. Wow. How did you, what led you to the kit in the first place? You mentioned that you were self-taught. Why the drums? And did you play an instrument prior to that, or did you just start with the drums?
I kind of started, I started with piano, and to this day, 40 years old, and to this day, one of my regrets is not sticking with piano, because my mom taught, and she was quite an accomplished player, and we had a piano in the house.
Wow.
And she would give us free lessons when we come home from school. She wasn't real strict about it. It's like, you got to practice so it's not a waste of my time. But, if you want to do 15 minutes or you want to do an hour, it's up to you. Just stick with it. And, stubborn young teenager getting into punk rock, they're like, what the fuck is piano ever going to offer me? And it's the biggest, honestly, it's so short-sighted and stupid, and such a versatile instrument that can, just expand everything you do on any instrument.
Totally.
I mean, the rhythm just being applied to drums alone is worthwhile. So I regretfully did not stick with that, but shortly after I started getting into drums, I think it was just like I was tapping around on stuff, and my parents noticed, and they got me this toy for Christmas I called Hit Sticks, and it was like kind of this weird little. It was these plastic drum sticks that had like a telephone sort of looping cable that went from them into this little speaker that you clip onto your belt.
Oh wow!
And you put like a AA battery on it, and you just whack it in the air. You didn't even have to hit something. If you flicked it hard enough, it would make a shitty digital snare sound.
Right.
It made the same sound regardless of what you hit and how you hit it. So it was just a whole bunch of snares, but the gesture was the same.
Yeah.
And then after that, it was because one of my older brothers started playing guitar, and it was like, well, if we both play guitar, the odds of us being able to ever do a band together or something is probably pretty fruitless. So I then eventually saved up and got my first set of drums and started bashing away.
Wow. And did your brothers, I know you mentioned you had brothers and y'all were going to shows and stuff. Did your other brothers play any instruments at all? Did y'all jam at all, or was it just you?
We all sort of dabbled, but myself and one of my older brothers, we played in the band together for years, actually toured quite a bit and went down all through the States. And so, yeah, we actually played shows for quite a few years. We put out like 3 records.
Right on.
And my other brothers, like, they were competent. They could play, but they didn't do band stuff. It was just, they did their own thing.
Right. What was the name of the band that you had with your brother that you toured with?
was called Three Penny Opera, and
Okay.
we at that time we were living in Ottawa. My dad was in the military, so we moved down a ton. So Ottawa was just happened to be where we landed.
Yeah.
That was sort of like, formative years of, late middle school into junior high and then high school and shit like that. So that's when things are being, you sort of, you figure out what you're into and what you're not,
Right.
And it wasn't sports, so it was going to be something else.
You mentioned going out on that tour and touring the States and putting out those records and everything. When METZ first started, it's one of the questions I like to ask bands early on. Are there any particular super ridiculous show that you recall or that y'all even joke about amongst yourselves today as being especially just ridiculous or bizarre even?
I remember one of the worst shows we've ever played was in London, Ontario. I think we were playing with the band Obits,
Mm-hmm.
and we did a string of shows with them. And it was just one of those nights where just something wasn't clicking. And we're just, we had to stop a couple songs, or like I counted one in weird and we went into different songs. It was just,
Yeah.
and, even just a week later we could laugh about it, but it was one of those ones. It was clearly bad enough that it still sticks in my memory now.
Yeah.
But thankfully, I don't think we have too many where it haunts you for a while. It's like, oh, that was kind of cringeworthy.
Right.
There was one I remember in I think it was Quebec City, that because the first couple of years at least in METZ, I wasn't allowed in the States. I got banned from the States for like a border thing, just for a previous band going to play a benefit show, albeit. And they thought we didn't have work papers because it was a benefit show. And then last minute we kind of got cold feet and we're like, yeah, we're not playing a show. And then we just got hauled in. And anyway, so everyone in the band, there was no sketchiness. There was no there's no drugs or any that kind of shit. It was just, they just didn't believe us. And they had some people in training that night that they were kind of showing the ropes. And we were the only people that crossed that border all night, the entire night.
Wow.
So we got separated and sat in there for about 6 hours, and we just fessed up. It's like, yeah, look, we just do this on the weekends when we're not working part-time jobs, man. And they just weren't having it. So we got banned for 5 years.
Wow.
So yeah, so from 25 to age 30, I wasn't allowed in the States. And I think we started METZ around when I was like 27, 28. So for the first couple of years, we had to be pretty creative about it. And we toured Canada, which is difficult. And eventually, I had people write to congressmen or congress people on my behalf. We had immigration lawyers looking into it. Like nothing would work. So after the 5 years, pretty much to the day had come and gone, I was calling border offices and like, look, here's the deal. Am I allowed to cross now? Because I have a P1 visa that's been not activated, but it's been granted.
Yeah.
We've all gotten proper papers so we can do it properly this time. And they're just like, I don't know, I've never heard of anything like this. I'm like, fuck, all right. So we drove to Niagara Falls, and the other two dudes stayed on the Canadian side. I took my passport and walked on the pedestrian bridge to the border office, and just before I went up, I'm like, look, I'm not trying to cross, because I've been told before, it's like, if you come near the border and try to cross, you can face jail time depending on what guard you get.
Jesus.
This is like, the ban is a serious thing.
Right.
So I was sweating bullets because I didn't want to jeopardize any more band stuff, and I didn't want to be banned for life or anything. So I walked up and so I explained it, and he was like, all right, well, let me have a look. So he looked at the passport and he was like, no, you're good. Do you want me to activate the visa now? And I was like, yes. So,
oh my God.
yeah. So I was sweating it pretty hard for a while, but even then, after that, for a couple of years, we always had to allot a couple extra hours at any border, because as soon as my passport would get swiped, so this generic red flag would come up saying like, this guy's got to go to secondary screening, but it didn't say why. So it could have been anything from jaywalking to armed robbery. So it was just like, eventually that disappeared. So now I haven't had any problems.
Right.
I don't know how much of this I should be saying. I mean, it's all water under the bridge. It was like 10
Totally.
years ago, but still, I don't know. It's crazy. It's just like, the border is still fucking terrifying. Even if, we're not into any sketchy shit. And my palms get sweaty going to the border every fucking time.
Damn, dude. The things you do for rock and roll. Holy moly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Oh, man, that's good stuff. Well, I had a question for you as a visual artist who also obviously plays in music. Are there any parallels between those two worlds? Obviously, you have one visual, one audible. Are there parallels beyond it just being a creative outlet that you've seen in doing this over time?
Even if I can't come up with concrete explanations why, I think it would be more difficult to try and explain why they don't have parallels or why there aren't similarities.
Yeah.
So I definitely think there are any creative endeavor, but specifically talking about visual stuff, because that's what you asked. Like, I think everyone's got a process to how they do their stuff, and I think it's a slippery slope to kind of it's trial and error for a number of years until you formulate some sort of style or aesthetic or some sort of some sort of niche of like, this feels mine. This feels like my visual identity, whereas a band is sort of your sonic identity to some degree.
Sure.
But on the other side of that can easily sometimes become this slippery slope of falling into this really formulaic, clinical way of approaching it,
Sure.
where you find something that kind of works and you stick within that template and you just do it over and over and over. And sometimes you don't even realize you're doing it until someone calls you out, and that can be a rude awakening. It's like, shit, yeah, I have been doing the same fucking thing for 10 years and or drawing the same little cartoon or whatever. So I think in some ways you have to kind of push yourself to do things differently, even if at the risk of alienating people that might be fans of your stuff, or make mistakes, try stuff and fuck it up. Like,
right.
So I think there's that's not the most profound similarities.
No, I think that's an interesting distinction for sure, though.
And one of the differences that still lend to that same parallel is that when it's art stuff that I'm doing on my own, I don't need to consult anybody. So for better or for worse, success or failure, that's my call. And that can be refreshing, but I also completely miss the sort of collective camaraderie of making decisions as a band, whether it's for album art or whether it's for a poster or a t-shirt design or a song.
Right.
So I think I like having the balance of the two worlds, and I love when they can commingle and overlap.
Yeah.
But they don't need to for them to be satisfying on their own.
Gotcha. And by the way, I looked up the Caretaker because I was curious as to how you described it, and it sounds like you're pretty much on it. It says it's this Leland James Kirby, whose work under the Caretaker moniker has been characterized as exploring memory and the gradual deterioration of it, nostalgia and melancholia. So there you go. I'd say that is what you described.
Okay, good. I'm glad I didn't completely butcher that concept.
No, man. Oh, my God. It's good stuff. Well, Hayden, man, it was good talking to you, man.
Likewise.
I look forward to hopefully catching you coming through the States at some point, post sweaty palms from your PTSD of crossing the border, of course. And definitely look
It's all good now.
Yeah, definitely look forward to hearing Atlas Vending now that I know where you recorded it and who you worked with and the process behind it. And the songs that I've heard thus far sound super cool, especially which I really like the jam that y'all stuck on the end of A Boat to Drown In, that kind of extended instrumental jam on the tail end of that. I thought was
cool.
Yeah. And all in all, again, it sounds great. So I'm definitely psyched on hearing the rest of the record.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much.
All right, everybody, thanks for tuning in, and thanks to Hayden for rapping. Digging these new songs off Atlas Vending and psyched to crank that shit when it's out. Definitely hyped on them going out there to Machines with Magnets, as I was a fan of the Daughters record that I mentioned during this interview. So definitely looking forward to it. We'll catch y'all on the next one. Crash, bang, boom.